Hilchis Malveh V'Loveh Perek Shmina Aser. Hamalves Chaveri Stam Harikol Nechosav Achroin Varvoin L'Chev Zeh. So a person lends someone money. So besides the fact that he owes the money, so his nechosim and Pashas Kol Nechosim in Sayis Kark and Sayis Metaltalin or Achroin Varvoin L'Chev Zeh. They're Achroi to pay up this chev. Lefichach Ksheyove Ligbes. So when the Malveh comes to be Teveya the Leva, it's the first thing is Teveya is Balchev Tchila. There must because Mishnas Masber al Derech, just like Ein Efroim min Ha'Leva min Ha'Arav Tchila, you have to go first to the Leva and then you go to the Arav. So over here also you don't go to the Nechasim because the Nechasim are Achroim va'arvoim l'chev zeh. You go to the Leva himself. Ksheyavi Ligbis is first of all Teveya is Balchev Tchila. First Teveya, the person that owes you the money. Im Motze imi Nechasim. If you find the chosim by the leva, by metalton bin karkois, is goyim mehem beratzon haleva. So then you go ahead and mon from him beratzon haleva. Ve'im b'leinosim haleva midaita. B'lepel if the leva doesn't give himself, so then it's mag b'nei bezin. So then bezin goes and takes from the karka or from the metalton the parshas. It sounds like that this is going on side of the metalton, inside the karka, which is nechosim, which is achroim v'arvoim l'chev zeh. Now, everything that the leva has is not really enough to pay the shtarchev. So now there's a new din. Hareza goiva mikola karkois shehoyu leleva afal pishein atem mechurim lacherim ein esunim matona. So now you could go ahead. The malva could go and mon from the karka which the leva had, even though right now they're no longer in the possession of the leva. Of course, hoyu lemocher haleva. Because since there was already a shibud on these nechosim, is hareza meitzi miyad alakuchis e miyad bali hamatons. And v'zeu nikra terev. So then there's a musik of terev. So the seder is you have to go a month from the leva himself, and the leva should give me daite. If the leva doesn't give me daite, so then you month from the nechosim of the leva. Now, if the leva doesn't have nechosim, so now the leva sold nechosim after he had the loan, and they were meshubed to this chayv, this nechosim were meshubed to the chayv, so now you could go to the buyers of this shibud and take from them. Now, b'medvar mamurim, that you could go to someone that bought from the leva, you could go to someone that bought from the leva because it was meshubed to the chayv, b'medvar mamurim b'karkois, shahoyu lebe'eshalava, the karkois which he had, b'medvar mamurim b'karkois, shahoyu lebe'eshalava. This is talking about only the karka which the leva had when he borrowed. In other words, avol nechosim haboyim le'lachar shalova. However, those nechosim that the leva received after he borrowed, so even though he had it while he had the shibud, in other words, he borrowed on Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and then he bought this karka on Beis Nisan, and then he sold it on Gimel Nisan. So this karka, even though the karka was his while he owed the money to the malva, but since when he borrowed the money from the malva, that's not when he had the karka, so therefore this karka bepashtus doesn't become a shubah. That's the din. That's what the Rambam holds, that the pashtus advarim is that karka which he possesses without making a clear t'nai, like we'll learn, so is not considered meshubed to the malva. Nachamal. Those karkas which he had while he borrowed, so that's taka meshubed to the malva. But those karkois that he received after he borrowed is laying the shtabdul balchev, and therefore vein terfim, and therefore the balchev can be terif them. However, v'im hisnolov shekol nechosav sheyikna yimushabodim liparimem, they made it clear tonight that the nechosav which the leva will be kaina should also become meshubed liparimem v'kon na'acha shalova, and then u'machar inosan is harei balchev terif mehem. So the din is that even though the chur normally the pashtus would be the makna of shlei b'leilam, so the chur, if there's no shibud be'etzim, the fact that the leva owes money doesn't cause a shibud on his nechasim. Only when the leva borrows the money, at that point in time there becomes a shibud on nechasim. So the chur, since when he borrowed the money, he didn't have those nechasim, so how could he cause that there should become a shibud on the nechasim that he's going to buy later? There's bishleim if you would say that the nechasim, once he owes money, so anything that he owns becomes a shibud, so it wouldn't be a shayla, because right now he owes the money, and it becomes a shibud of the nechasim. But now we're saying no, that the pashtus advarim is the fact that you owe money doesn't cause a shibud. So only when you borrow money, so that's when it becomes a shibud. So l'chura, this item that you didn't have when you borrowed, so l'chura, how did the shibud become? Because you made up that when you borrowed the money, you're Chedesh Nissen, so what you're going to buy on Beis Nissen should also become a shibud. L'chura, what you buy on Beis Nissen is a davar shlei bo leilam. So it's brought down that it's really a din d'Rabbanan, the whole musig, that the shibud should be chal on the nechosim, which you buy later, that's really a din d'Rabbanan. The ikra de din, just like Eino the maknu davar shlei bo leilam, so you can be meshabed also a davar shlei bo leilam. I'll call upon it, but that's the din. So the Rambam holds that the pashtus advarim, if they didn't make up clearly the asidan no lemikli, that the nechosim that I'm going to buy later should also become meshubed. So it's not meshubed, it's only meshubed the nechosim that the leva had while he borrowed. Masha'inkin, if they made up clearly that the nechosim which he's going to buy later is also going to be meshubed, so it becomes meshubed. Halacha beis, en kol advarim hamurim ela bekarka. This din that we're saying, that when a person sells karka, so the karka is meshubed to the balche, to the malveh, that's only talking about karka. By metalton, there's no achrayis. You cannot go and mon when a person goes ahead and sells the metalton, so you can't go ahead and mon from the metalton. Even the metalton which the leva had while he borrowed, and it was not only the metalton he bought later, the metalton that he had when he borrowed, and shemachram l'shaite, say he sold it l'shaite, which means he didn't sell it a permanent sale. He only sold it a partial sale, or a certain amount of time a sale. Nevertheless, since lepel, the item belonged to the leva, and the leva sold it, so there's no real shibud on this metaltalin to the sense that there's achrayis on the metaltalin, and therefore ein balchev teiref esim. The balchev cannot be teiref this metaltalin that the leva sold. Now the ma'aseh is the pashtus advarim. So when a leva sells metaltalin, the balchev cannot go a month from the metaltalin. There's an issue when the metaltalin finds itself still bershus haleva. Because when the leva goes ahead and sells the metaltalin, so the achrayis doesn't have a din on the metaltalin. When the metaltalin finds itself bershus haleva, is there like a shibud on that metaltalin? Or we're saying no, b'chlal there's no musig of a shibud on metaltalin. The musig is only that the person owes the money. So obviously, since the metaltalin is his, he has to pay the money from the metaltalin. But there's no musig of shibud on metaltalin. Now the ma'aseh is the Rambam in the beginning of the halachas, in the first halacha, he says, "Hari kol nechosav achroim barvoim l'cheiv zeh," and therefore lefichuk shiyave. So the din sounds like over there that lepel bezin is magbe aside from the karka, aside from the metaltalin, and over there it sounds like because kol nechosav, which b'pashtus means sai karka and sai metaltalin. Now when they're talking about metaltalin that was sold, so over here the Rambam is saying that the metaltalin that was of metaltalin ein alei machrayis. So pashtus ein alei machrayis when they're sold. Masha'inkin when they weren't sold, so then there is achrayis. That's a dion. But again, the lumdus of when you go ahead and you take metaltalin from the leva itself, is there a certain shibud on the metaltalin? Or we say no, that since it's metaltalin, so there's no musig of shibud at all. Or the musig that there's no shibud on metaltalin only means that when the metaltalin is actually sold to someone else, so there's no shibud enough to be able to mon from the metaltalin when they're sold to someone else. But I'll call upon him, the halach is clear, that when it finds itself b'shus haleva, you could mon aside from the karka, aside from the metaltalin. When it finds itself b'shus halikeach, so from karka you could mon, and the Rambam is saying the pashtus only the karka which the leva had b'shas halva, unless they specified that also the further karkois that he's going to buy should also be meshubed. Masha'inkin metaltalin, the pashtus of the metaltalin, even the metaltalin that he had b'shas halva, and he goes ahead and sells it, is not achroi for the chayv. Now, hiknel balchevi kol metaltalin algav karka sheyesh lias nifur menakel. A person made a clear hakno. As he said that I'm being maknet. In other words, I'm borrowing from you. The leva is borrowing money, and memela his karka is becoming mishubed to the malva. And he's saying that besides the karka which I have is becoming mishubed to a malva, I want also that my metaltalin, agav, the karka that's becoming meshubed, should also become the metaltalin meshubed. In other words, there was a clear upmach that agav, that the karka of mine is becoming meshubed, and it's only talking about, it's brought down, that it's only talking about if Itaka has karka, agav, that the karka of mine is becoming meshubed, I want also that the metaltalin should become meshubed. So then the metaltalin also becomes meshubed. It becomes meshubed because there was a kno of the shibud through kinyan agav. Nachamol. Hiknel balchevi kol metaltalin agav karka sheyeshlei lies nifur menakil. There was a clear upred that together with the shibud that's going on the karka, there should become a shibud on the metaltalin, that shibud on the metaltalin is being nikna b'kinyan agav, is a reza terev mesa metaltalin. V'hu sheyichtiv lebishtar chev. It should be written in the shtar chev that besides the fact that he's writing a shtar, you should know that there's going to come achroi not only on the karka, but there's also on the metaltalin. V'hu sheyichtiv shtar chev sheiknesi lecha metaltalin sheyeshli al gav karka sheyeshli. And shalei kasmachta v'shalei ketevsi shtaris. There was a clear shtar written in a way that this is a clear kinyan that he's being makna him the shibud on this metaltalin. It's not kasmachta, which asmachta is not kanya. There's asmachta is like a certain shibud, which is totally in certain inyanim, and mele it's not really, there's no smichas das. And al deras of alei ketevsi shtaris is not stam, it's a nusach of a shtar, which doesn't have really a validity. It's a proper shtar. That's din number one. And then he's saying v'chein im kosev, not only if the metaltalin that the leva owned b'shas of the halva could become mishubed to the chayv when he writes it with a kinyan agav, v'chein im kosev shekol nechosim shani osid liknis, that the nechosim which I will buy bein karkois bein metaltalin is arei mishubadim l'chol lihiparim mehem, and v'metaltalin that I'm gonna buy is knuyim l'cha al gabi akarkois lihiparim mehem, and also shalik asmachta v'leich ketevsi shvaris. So he's writing clearly. When he's only being makna the karka, so the Rambam didn't really say that he has to make up a ganze nusach. The Rambam just said earlier in Sof Halacha Aleph, in his knowledge, shekol nechosim, yom shabodim is memela balchev terif mem. Over here, when he's being makna metaltalin, so the Rambam says he has to make a clear nusach in the shtar, that it should be written clearly that he's being makna the metaltalin agav the karka. And now he's also could be makna the metaltalin which he's going to buy. Notice he made up with him. He's borrowing from the leva is borrowing money. So Mela can move in all the nechosim that he has, the karka that he has becomes meshubit. We said that he could also be meshabed the metaltalin that he has, and he could also be meshabed the metaltalin that he's going to buy. So Mela he's also being meshabed bepashtos. He's not only being meshabed the metaltalin he's going to buy, he's also meshabed the karka he's going to buy. V'cheinam kosev shekol nechosim shani osid liknes ben karka ben metaltalin harei meshubadim l'chol lihiparim mehem b'hametaltalin knuya l'cha al gabi hakarkois, the karkois which he has now. And he can't be maknim the metaltalin which he's going to buy later agav the karka which he's going to buy later. It means to say that he has karka now, and the karka now that he's being meshabedim, and memela agav the karka that he's being meshabedim now, he's also saying that he's being meshabedim the karka that he's going to buy later. And also the metaltalin which he's going to buy later. Metaltalin knuya l'chal gabi hakarkois the hiparim mehem shalei kasmacht, and again shalei ketevsi shtaris. He's writing that's a proper kinyan. So then is a terif af min metaltalin shekon haleva la'achar shalava shekol tnai shebemam makayin. So again, so there's a musik called shibud. There's a musik called shibud. So a leva has to pay. If the leva doesn't pay miatzme, you could go ahead and take from his nechosim shalei midaite. That's a din bezdin takes from him. Then there's another din that you could go ahead and take from the karka that he owned while he borrowed. That's the pashtus advarim, that the karka that he owned while he borrowed is meshubit. If they made up clearly that the karka which he's going to buy after he borrowed is also become meshubit, so it also becomes meshubit. But metaltalin doesn't become meshubit. So when he sells the metaltalin, those metaltalin, even the metaltalin that he had while he borrowed, is not meshubit. If he made up clearly that he's selling, that he's being makna the shibud on the metaltalin, the shibud on metaltalin is being makned agav the shibud on the karka. So in other words, through the loan is becoming a shibud on the karka, and through that he's also being makna that there should be a shibud. The leva is being makna there should be also a shibud on his metaltalin. So then there becomes a shibud on metaltalin. You have to spell it out clearly in the shtar that he's being makna also a shibud on metaltalin, and that shibud is like asmachta of like tefse shtaris. And Nachmer, he could be Meshabed also the metaltalin, which he's going to buy later. And again, he spells it out in the shtar that all the karka and the metaltalin, which he's going to buy later, should become Meshubed aga the karka which he has now. The karka that has now is becoming Meshubed, and Alderazed, the karka which he's going to buy is going to become Meshubed, and Alderazed, metaltalin which he's going to buy is also going to become Meshubed. And that goes into the gather of Kol Tnai Shebemam and Kain. Halachi Gimel. Oso Sadeu Apoitiki Lebal Chayve Elisha Biksubasa. So normally, when a Balchev and Aldera Zaisha, she has a shibur on all the karkois. The Rambam started, Ar Kol Nechosav, Ar Chroim Barvoim. Now there's a musik that a person designated a certain piece of karka that should be an apoitiki. Rashi teaches apoitiki means poi tehi koi. The Rambam teaches what's the teach apoitiki? V'hu sheyichtiv lem mikam tigbu. So the get the apoitiki means he's saying that the gvia should be from this karka, and v'shotfei nor, and this karka became shotfei nor. So on that the Rambam was saying that the fact that he made an apoitiki doesn't preclude the other karkois from being the shibud. It means to see that I have a designated shibud on this karka, and therefore I could mon. If you're giving me karka, I could mon this karka. Or if, by the lekuches also, he could mon. The lekuches, one lekech can't push him off to the other lekech. Normally, an earlier lekech could push him off to a later lekech. In other words, let's say he had two karkois, and both were worth the same amount that the chayv is worth, and he sold one piece of karka, and then he sold the second piece of karka. So he could only go to the second lekech, and the first lekech kataina, he nachti lechamokim ligbisimenu, because lepel, you had an option to go to the other karka. Masha'inkin over here, since there's an apoitiki, so therefore he has a right to mon from this karka that was designated for him. That's the chiddush. We'll learn b'hamshech also. The chiddush of apoitiki, that lepel, one lekech wouldn't be able to push him off to the other lekech. Now, if the loiva wants to pay with money and he doesn't want to pay with karka, so even though you have an apetik, even if you have an apetik in mefurish, so lepel, the loiva is always, or the baal is always in the position to say, I'll pay money and I'm not going to pay karka. The baal, or the baal chev. Masha'inkin, if he's giving him karka, so then the person that has an apetik says, I have a tzchus to mon this karka. Sai from the malveh himself, and al derech from the lekuches, even though one lekeach is lemashal, that the one that bought the apoitiki was an earlier lekech, and the one that bought the other karka was a later lekech, and normally the earlier lekech, as we'll learn b'hamshach, could push him off to the later lekech, but over here, since there's an apoitiki, you can't push it off. So we'll learn that more b'hamshach. But I'll call upon Nachamol. Also, sadeu apoitiki el-balcheve el-isha b'ksubasa. And what's the type of an apoitiki? V'hu sheyichtiv lehem mikan tigbu, and lepel v'shotvi nor, this karka, which he made as an apoitiki, became shotfi nor, and there was a river went over it. Now it's no longer usable. So the din is hareza geva mishar nechosim v'teirefesim. In other words, even though he has an apoitik on a piece of karka, but that's not precluding his shibur on the other karkois. In other words, he has a shibur on all the karkois, but he has this designated shibur on this karka that he has a right to take preference on this karka. That's the din of an apoitiki. Now v'him hisne imei sheliyeli piroin elamizu. If lepel, the malva made up with the leva, and the leva made up with the malva, that the apoitik, that the shibud is only going to be on this karka, leiyel piroin elam yizol din shibud, so taka ain't gave him shar nechasim. Then taka has no right to be gave from the shar nechasim. In other words, there's a shibud, there's a chayv, but on the other end, there's no shibud on the other nechasim. V'cheinim lovim imenu upira she'ein le'achrayis olav. He borrowed and he made clearly that there's not going to be any achrayis nechasim. In other words, he has no shibur on any nechasim. Is a reza in a gever. Now mishabadim leilim, and it can't be gever from any mishabadim. In other words, there's as we learned till now, a tanai shibamaman is always kayam. So even though normally we say achrayis toy sefer, and so that's a that normally we assume that there's a shibur on karka with a star, there's a shibur on karka, but nevertheless there's a musig of first of all designating a certain karka as being an apoitiki, which means that he has first rights on this karka, and therefore you can't push him off to another karka. That's din number one. And then there's a musik of an apoitiki mefurish, which is being magbel, his shibud. Apoitiki not mefurish is like not so, is fakert, is enhancing his shibud, that he has an extra shibud on this karka. Although it's also being magbel, that lepeli came on another karka while this karka is around. But on the other end, it's also being magbir shibur, that he has an extra shibur on this karka. But she'inkin, if he doesn't have this karka, if shotvi nor, so then he has the shibur on the other karkois. Masha'inkin, when he's speaking about a peitik mefurish, pshat is that the hagbal is that the shibur is only on this karka. This is the only karka that's meshubit. And lepel, if this karka was shotvi nor, so then he doesn't have any shibur. Halacha Daled. Also Sadeu apoitiki lebal chayvei eliisha biksubasa. He made an apoitiki, and the Magnishan teaches that we're not talking about an apoitiki mefurish, we're talking about a regular apoitiki. He made an apoitiki umocher, and then he went ahead and sold this karka, which is an apoitiki. So the din is harezu mechura, the mechir is chal, and ukshiyavi bal chayv ligbeis. im leyimtzu nechasim lecherim. If he won't find nechasim lecherim by the loiva, so now he's going to come a month from the mishubadim. So the din is yitrevei, so then he could go a month from this apetiki. Now the Rambam is going to say this in the next parak. The din is that ein nefroim nechasim mishubadim b'makim sheyesh b'necherim. So if the loiva himself has karka, and he went ahead and he sold karka, so you cannot go a month from the mishubadim when the loiva himself has karka. Ein nefroim nechasim mishubadim b'makim sheyesh b'necherim. And now that we're saying also that even though the mishubadim is an apetiki, in other words, he designated a certain karka as being an apetiki, and then he went ahead and sold this karka, but lepel is still b'necherim by the loiva. So the din is also ein nefroim nechasim mishubadim b'makim sheyesh b'necherim. Now the Maggid Mishnah says, it doesn't say this clearly in Rambam, but the Maggid Mishnah says that by medvar mamurim, when we're talking about stam and apetiki, by stam and apetiki we say ein nefroim nechasim mishubadim, even though it's an apetiki b'makim sheyesh nechasim necherim, because lepel you have a shibud under necherim as well. Masha'en came if there's an apetiki mefurish, we're talking about an apetiki mefurish le'yeh lechashibud ela mizeh. So then you could be nefroim, and you went ahead and sold this apetiki mefurish. So then you could go ahead and mon from this apetiki mefurish, which is mishubadim, even though the leva has been eched. But I'll call upon here. We're talking about a case where it's not an apetiki mefurish. So it's also sodeo apetiki l'balchei v'lisha b'ksubaso umachra. So the mechira is chal erizim mechura ukshiyavi balchei v'ligbeis im leyimtzu nechasim necheden is yitrefeis. Mashenkin if there is nechasim necheden, it can't be teiref. Now, by medvar mamurim that the mechira is chal on an apetiki, and it's just at lepel if there's no nechasim necherin, that's when the balchev could go and mon it. That's only b'shemacher l'shaita. When he sold the sale, it was clearly they were selling it, and he told them clearly that there's an apetiki on it, and the mela, when the balchev will come and take it, so he'll take it away. Aval mocher mem korelim, if he sold it b'chinas mem korelim, in other words, there was no mention that there was this is only a temporary mechira, so then ein mechura, it's not mechura, and the pashas advarim because a mekachtos. Because he wouldn't have bought it if he would have known that it's an apetiki. He wouldn't have bought it a mekarelim if he knows it clearly that it's a mechira l'shaita. So then he'd be willing to buy it. Mashenkin from mem karelim, we could assume that it was a mekachtos. Halacha hey, also avdei apetiki. A person made his eved apetiki. So now we're learning over here that you can make your eved an apetiki as well. Umachri, and then you went ahead and sold the eved. So the din is hari balchev gave him imenu. So the balchev could be gave from this eved. Now the question is over here the takonis halakuches, as we said, just like before, that lepel there's a concern that the lakuches shouldn't lose out from the fact that there was something that was meshubed and they weren't aware of it. Now we learned before be'emes that even the taltalin you could be meshabed if you make a ma'aser kinyan there agav. If you make a kinyan agav or you make she makna the shibud on the metalton agav the karka. So even though l'chura normally there's no coil to a shibud on metalton, is vice to so that's what's brought down from Aruch HaShulchan, that he says that when the metalton was mishtabed agav the karka, then there is a coil. So something hard to understand. But I'll call upon if a person owns karka and he owns metalton, and he borrowed money. And the mele his karka became a shubit, and he was makna. And there's a star that says clearly that he was also makna the metaltalin agav the karka. So then the shibud is also on the metaltalin, and therefore if the leva is going to go ahead and sell metaltalin, so the malveh could go ahead and mon from those metaltalin, from the people that bought the metaltalin, because there's a shibud on metaltalin. Now we're saying like this: if there was a person borrowed money and he had a eved, and he made an apoitik on this eved, and knows that this eved, the designated place of mourning from the shibud, is from this eved. So the din is, since his eved goes ahead and tells people that he's an apoitik, and people know about it, vice versa, so it's yeshli kel. So when a person goes ahead and buys this eved, we say, who hifsid alatzmi? He should have been aware that this eved is an apoitik. But we'll soon learn that if he buys other betaltalin, if he makes his share into an apoitik, so then we could assume that the buyer didn't know about it, and if the din is going to be that the malveh could go ahead and mon from the share, so we made it'll be a hefset for the buyer, because the buyer, the pastors, didn't know about it. There was no way of him knowing about it. So therefore, the apetiki doesn't work. That's what we're learning here. Also, avde apetiki, a person makes his evidence to apetiki umochrei. So the din is Ari Bal Chev gave him imenu. The Bal Chev could be gave from this Eved. Mipnei sheyesh lekel, there's a coil that this Eved is an apetiki, and therefore we're not worried about the takonis alakukas because the lekeach should have been aware of it. Who hifsed al atzmei. However, asa sheri apetiki umochri, if he made the sheri into apetiki and he sold it, is ein Bal Chev gave him imenu v'chish ar metaltalin mipnei she'ein lem kel. So again, although we learned that if you makne a shibud on metaltalin, agav the karka, so then you could man from the metaltalin. L'chura, what's with takonis alakukas? We're saying an apoitig on metaltalin is ein lekel. So l'chura, shibud on metaltalin should also be ein lekel. So vice to is, that's what I'm saying from the Aruch HaShulchan, that vice to is that when the shibud was on the metaltalin, agav the karka, so then it has a kill. Masha'inkin, if the shibud was stam on the metaltalin, so if the shibud was on the eved, he made an apoitig on the eved, so then it's yesh lekil because the eved is mefarsim. Masha'inkin, if it was an apoitiki on karka itself without being agav karka, so then if there was an apoitiki on metaltal itself, so that we say is ein lekil, and therefore you can mon from the metaltal. Halacha vav eved she'asei rabbi apoitiki v'shichrei. So we learned that a rabbi could make an eved into an apoitiki, and lepil then he went ahead and he was mishachar the eved. So while the eved was an eved, so maybe he has a din of mominus, so you can have a shibur on the eved. And even if you sell the eved, lepeil, so the Malveh has a shibur on the eved, so maybe you go and take it from the lekeach. Masha'egin, if he's meshachar the eved, he's no longer an eved. He's no longer an eved. Ben has no domin. So maybe the metzias of what the eved was is no longer here. That's an eved, she'asi rabbi apetiki v'shichrei, is afal pi shekosiv le'liyah l'chapiroin el mizeh. In other words, the shibud was on this eved and there was no other shibud, so l'chur you could almost say that the Malveh almost owns this eved, and le'liyah l'chashibud el mizeh. But nevertheless, Lepel at this point in time he wasn't geiva the shibud, so therefore it belongs to the leva, and he's in the position to be mishachrim. And what's his mishachrim? There's nothing to have a shibud on. Is yotze lecheres v'chein migdishe. If he was magdish the eved, for example, if it was magdish anything that there is a shibud on, so then that hegdish is also mafkia midei shibud. Now there's a machlekes rishenim whether what kind of hegdish is mafkia midei shibud. Some rishenim learn, that's what brought down also in Shulchan Aruch, that only hegdish of kedushas haguf is mafkia midei shibud. If you have a behema, which there's a shibud on this behema, and then you are magdish the behema kedushas haguf, you're magdish it to be a carbon. So now that it's a mitzvah of a carbon, so that's mafkia midei shibud. Masha'enkin, the fact that it now belongs to hegdish, and it's only kedushas damim, it only belongs to hegdish. It's just like if there's a buyer, someone owns something and he sells it, so the shibud is still there. So there's a hegdish. The hegdish became the buyer, since it's owned by hegdish, so therefore it has different dinim. But lepel, it's not a kedushas haguf; it's a kedushas dam. Hegdish owns the item. So even though they own the item, so those who sheinim hold that you could still go ahead and have a shibur on the hegdish. You can have a shibur on the hegdish because lepel, it's owned by hegdish. It's not a new mitzias. Mashenga the Rambam holds and other sheinim hold that a hegdish, even kedushas dam, is also mafkim the shibur. So the Rambam is saying v'chein migdishe. If you will magdish the item, any item, an eved or whatever item, you will magdish it, even kedushas damim. So that's also mafkim the shibur. And then the Rambam continues, which says in the Gemara, shachometz v'shichr v'hegdish mafkim the shibur. So in other words, hegdish is mafkim the shibur, and al der is a shichr is mafkim the shibur. There's two halachas that we learned, and also chometz. If you have your own chometz, and then the chometz became Pesach, so now it became Osir Bamno. So Mele is not shaychus a shibur on it. It became chometz. It became a mitzias of chometz. Chometz is Osir Bamno, so there's no longer a shibur. And kila, in other words, it belonged to the person that owned it. So even though the other person had a shibur on it, but that doesn't prevent it from becoming Osir Bamno. And once it becomes Osir Bamno, so Mele, the shibur it becomes mufka. So the din is nochamos. So eved she'asir rabbi apetik v'shichrei. So the din is that the shibur becomes uis, and al derezeh hegdish becomes uis, and al derezeh if it comes Pesach and it's a shibur on chometz, it becomes uis. V'harei bal chayv goyva chayvim na leva. So in this case where the leva went ahead and he was mishacher the eved, and lepel this we're talking about in a case where the eved is ein lecha piroin el mizeh. This was the only shibut. So now, lepel, the Malveh can no longer mon from the Eved, because the Shichr is mafkir midei shibud, but now the Malveh could mon the money from the Leva, vari balchev gave a chevim and a Leva, the case of olav shtar becheve. Now the Leva writes a new shtar towards the Malveh. And v'toyref mizmanz me'ashtar. But again, the previous chayv, so that chayv was only on the evet. And therefore, obviously, there's no other shibud. There's no other shibud other than the evet. And that evet was meshukra. Masha'inki now, since the leva went ahead and he was mafkia this shibud, so he was mazik the moment of the Malveh. The Malveh had a shibud on this evet. He no longer has the shibud because the shichur was mafkia with the shibud. So that's like a new chiyuv from the leva towards the Malveh. And that new chiyuv, the leva writes a new star about this chiyuv, and from that now on, there's a shibud. From the zman of the new star, there's a shibud on the nechosim of the leva for this new chayv that he has on the Malveh. That's his din. Bari bal chayv, goy v'chayvim on a leva. So now he goes to the leva and mons the money. The case of olav star b'chayve, and the leva writes a new star towards the Malveh b'chayve. And the teiref mizman zeh star. And the Malveh would be able to mon from the leva from the time of this new star. Why is the leva mechuyev l'shalom? What's this new star about? Because Lepeli was gerim to cause that the Malveh shibud should no longer be. And v'chol hagerim lahazik mishalom. And since he was gerim lahazik, he has to pay. The koifenus Rabbi Hasheni means the Malveh. Really, the Malveh was never the Rabbi. He only had a shibud on the evet. But Lepele looked like he's like the Rabbi. Therefore, the koifenus Rabbi Hasheni, the Shachrim Tikkun Elam. Shalim Tzena B'Shuk V'Yemeli Avdiyata. The Malveh shouldn't be able to find this evet. So in other words, the evet belonged to the leva. The Malveh had a peitigam mefurish on this evet. And Lepel, the leva went ahead was Meshachrim. So we don't want that the Malveh should be able to come to the evet and say Avdiyata. So therefore, we force the Malveh that the Malveh should go ahead and write also a shtar shikhr to this evet. Halacha Zayin. Hamagdish nechosov. Ein balchei v'yochel litrif min hegdish. As we said, hegdish is mafkim with shibud. As we mentioned, that the Rambam holds that even hegdish of kedusha's domim is also mafkim with shibud. So the balchei cannot be teirif min hegdish. Shah hegdish mafkia hashibud. Ukshepoiden hakarka miyad hegdish. So even we're talking about, let's say there's a shibud on karka, and then he was magdish the karka. So now when we're poiden hakarka miyad hegdish, oimdin kama odam roitzo liten besodazu. So the pale, when they're going to be paid to this karka, whoever is going to pay the karka is going to give money to Hegdish, and the memela, the karka is going to become his, but there's a shibur on this karka. So memela, right away, the Malveh will be able to take this karka away. So really, this person is not going to really end up with the karka. So what's the point of him being paid? He's being paid because he wants to help out this balchev, that the balchev should have karka. Or he wants to help out this isha, that she should have a ksuba. So the assessment, when you assess the karka, is not the assessment of the karka, how much the karka worth to a person that wants to have this karka, because he's not going to keep the karka. You assess the karka, how much is it worth to someone that wants to use this karka in order to help someone get paid as chayv, or someone to get paid the isha the ksuba. So that's just it. Ukshepoiden hakarka miyad hegdish oimden kama odem reitzel liten besodazu almana sheitnul balchev es chayv isha ksubasa. Lefichok shetipode v'teitzi lechulun biyad alekech it goes lechulun biyad alekech is yavi balchev v'yitrefei so yisha b'ksubasa k'misha b'yarnu be'erchen. So memela, that's the gather. The gather is that it becomes hegdish, and as soon as you're paid, so it becomes uis hegdish, and then as soon as it becomes uis hegdish, so it's chezev and neir that there's the shibud of the previous shibud is chal. Halacha ches, balchev shebolitre, the balchev that's coming to take away from the lekech, the karka was meshubet to him. Is im yesh mois lekech, if the lekech has money, is yachal esalke, v'litn le dmei mashu huteiref. In other words, he owes him, the leva owes him money, and lepel, he bought a karka from this leva, so, and this karka is worth, let's say he owed him $100, and he bought a karka that's worth $100. So he comes and he wants to take the karka, which is worth $100. Instead, the lekech could go ahead and give him the money. He could give him the $100 and say, don't take the karka. And then, the choizer halekech. So if the karka would have been taken away from the lekech, so then the lekech would go back to the meicher, to the leva, and take away ask him for the money. Lepel, he still has the karka, but he paid the money in order to keep the karka. So he could go back to the meicher, to the leva, which sold him the karka, and be reimbursed for the money that he paid in order to keep the karka by him. Just like if the karka would have been taken away from him. So he would have gone back to the seller, to the leva, and taken the money for the karka. So al derech zeh, if he paid money in order to keep the karka by him, he could go back to the seller and be reimbursed for that karka. However, now we're seeing a din that if the karka was an apetiki, is Eini Yochel L'Salki B'Dam. Then the Lekeach doesn't have the right L'Salki B'Dam. So now, since it's Apoy Tehikoi, so Memela, so the Lekeach has the Malveh has a shibur on the skarka, and therefore the Lekeach can't be Masalik B'Dam. So even though we learned before, it doesn't say really in the Rambam, but the din is that the Malveh, the actual Leva himself, the Leva, could be Masalik the Malveh B'Dam, even when there's an Apetikin, even if it's an Apetikin Mefurish. Masha'inkin, the Lekeach cannot be Masalik the Malveh B'Dam, since he has an Apetikin, he has a shibur on the skarka, so the Lekeach is not in the position to be Masalik the Malveh B'Dam. Halacha tes. Reuven shehayechayev l'Shimon Masayim. Reuven owed Shimon 200. V'hoyolei shtei sadis, and Reuven had 2 fields. Umachar achas mem leLevi b'mana. He sold one of those fields at one point for a mana, and then v'chazul umachar le'ashniya b'mana. Then he went and sold the second field also for a mana. So Lepel Reuven again owes Shimon 200. Now Reuven went ahead and sold his 2 fields, one to Levi for a mana, and then another one to Levi for a mana. Now Shimon comes, v'taraf achas b'mana. So he went ahead and took one of the fields away, and he says, listen, he owed me, my borrower owes me 200, he sold you 2 fields, now we're talking about 1 field. He went ahead and took one of those fields, which was worth 100. V'taraf achas b'mana. And he took one of the fields from Levi, which was worth a mana. But Lepel, Levi has 2 fields, and Lepel, Reuven owes him 200. Now v'chazar litrif hashniya b'mana nishalei. He still owed another 100. So now he says 100 was paid up. I took one of the fields. Now I want to take the other field for the second 100. That's what's happening here. So again, Reuven owed Shimon 200. Now Reuven had 2 fields. He sold Levi 1 field for 100, and then another field for 100. Now Shimon comes and goes to Levi, and he takes away one of the fields, which is worth 100. Now Shimon is already paid up 100. Lepel Reuven owes him another 100. Now Shimon is coming and wants to take from Levi the other field, which is worth another 100. Now Vehevi le Masayim. So now this Levi comes and he brings $200. He says, "V'amalei im tirtzu liyas hasoda shetarafta shumu lecha b'chol hamasayim sheyesh lecha." If you're willing that the field which you have should be considered for 200. In other words, even though be'emes the field is only worth 100, but that field should be able to take care of your 200 loan, and memele, so you have no longer a shibud, and you'll be yoitzu the shibud, so to speak, only with that 100, is fine. So I'm fine. However, vimlav, if you're not willing to do that, so then I'm going to take away both fields. In other words, you're coming to take another field. There's field 1 and field 2. You already took field 1. Now you want to take field 2. I want you to take field 1 for 200 and be mavater on field 2. Why should I do this? So I'll tell you another answer. If you don't, or you're not willing to be mavater to take field 1 as 200, so then I'm going to give you 200 and I'll take back field 1 as well. So in Mele, you get nothing. You don't get not field 1 or field 2, but you'll end up with 200. So you say, Im tirtzu liyas hasoda shetarafta shumu lecha b'chol hamasayim sheyesh lecha. Is Hari Mutav. This is all the Lekeach speaking to the Malveh. The Imlav, but if you're not willing, so Heilach Masayim Shel Chevcha V'Stalik, and here's the 200, and give me back that other field which you took from me. The din is Hadinam Levi. Levi has a right to say this. No, Levi has a right to say here, either you take the 200, either you take this field, and that field should be B'tur 200, or I'll give you 200, and Mele, that's the end of it. And l'chura hu adin, we're speaking a case, I'm not sure, we're speaking a case that first he took 1 field, and now he's coming to take the other field, and now he's bringing him the 200 to say, take the first field as worth 200. L'chura, the same thing would be if he comes along and he says, the Malveh owes me 200, and Lepel, I want to take this field, which is worth 200. And now comes along the buyer, and he tells the Malveh, listen, I'll give you 200, so you shouldn't take the field. Or if you want to have half of the field, you can take half of the field. Bim came 200. The chura would be the same idea. The buyer, the lekeach, is negotiating. Is basically negotiating on behalf of the malveh, on behalf of the leva. Notice the leva could also have the same negotiation. The leva owes the malveh $200. So the malveh comes along and he says, "Give me $200," or you don't have $200. Give me this field. So now comes along the Levi to the Malveh, and he says, listen, I have $200. But Lepel, I'll give you this field for $200. If the Malveh is willing to take it, Beseder, and if not, not. So over here also, the buyer is telling the Malveh, listen, there's this field that you took already. It makes luchur enough kamina if he took it or he didn't take it. In other words, the whatever position, in other words, you're owed 200, so you have a right to mon either $200 or to mon a field which is worth 200. I'm telling you that this field is taka worth 200, but I'm willing to give you half of this field in order to take away this chayv of 200, or I'll give you 200. So l'chura, if he's maskim, he's maskim. L'chura, it makes no difference if the seder was that first he took 100 and then he took another 100. L'chura. Now I'll call upon him. So the dinner said, "Dinim Levi." Levi is in the position to say that. Now Ratzah Shimon v'Amad. Shimon was maskim to keep the 100 and be mevater on the 200. So in other words, basically his chayv was paid up by this one field of 100. Is afal pi shekiblu b'masayim, even though Lepel, this Shimon, was mekabel this field for Masayim. So now l'chura, the buyer Levi turns back to Reuven and says, "Listen, you owe 200. I bought from you a field, and I took this field that I gave to Levi was really to cover the 200. So I want to get reimbursed from you 200. So we say, no, Lepel, you bought from me a field that was worth 100, and Lepel, you lost that field that was worth 100. So Mela, I'll only reimburse you 100. The fact that through that field that was worth 100, which you bought from me, you took away a choy from me that was worth 200. Thank you very much. But on the other end, I don't owe you more than 100. He says, even though Shimon accepted that field for 200, nevertheless, in Levi, which is l'chura pashat. Halachiyut. Mes Reuven owes Shimon 200. Mes Reuven v'niach soda acha shaveh, which is worth 100. Ubo Shimon v'torfa. And Lepel, the Shimon comes, Reuven owes him money, and he wants to take away the field which is worth 100. Because Lepel, he has a field that's worth 100. He wants to take away Lefachas, the 100. Now Lepel, the Yisemim, v'nosnu Yisemim meya me'ametalton sheiniach aviyim v'silku. They gave him 100. He came to take this field, and they went ahead, and instead of him taking the field, they went ahead and they gave him the meya. Now Lepel, it's not pshat he took the field, and then they gave him the meya. He came to take the field, and Lepel, they gave him meya. So Lepel, the mayor that they gave him was also a good thing, because normally we learned before that it's a mitzvah la yisemim to lefrei achev avim even for metaltalim. So therefore, Hareza Lochamal Mes Reuven died, and he owed 200 to Shimon. V'niach soda achas shaveh, and he left only one field that's worth 100, and he also left metaltalim. Ubo Shimon v'torfa. Shimon was coming. Shimon, which Reuven owed the money to, is coming to take away that field. So they gave him 100 from the metalton sheniach havim v'silkur, and they were really interested in him avoiding to take the karka. Is the din is hareza cheza v'teira feisa b'shar chevi. Lepel, he got paid 100, and that got paid 100. You can't say that was instead of the field, because Lepel, the Yisayim are also, there's a mitzvah for the Yisayim to pay from the metalton. So therefore, hareza cheza v'teira feisa b'shar chevi. Shemeya shenosle mitzvah. Whereas if they would go to Lekuchas and they want to take karka from him, and the Lekuchas is misalik them with money, so Memela, they can go back to this karka and say we want to take the karka again. They were misalik with money instead of the karka. Mashenka, when they go to the Yisayim give them metaltalin, so the din is that this metaltalin that they give is in itself a mitzvah. So in other words, Shemeya shenosli mitzvah, so shemitzvah Yisayim lefrei chevus avim. It wasn't only, these metaltalin you can't say was only instead of the karka. Because Lepel, there's a mitzvah for them to give the metaltalum of their father also. Shemitzvah la Yisayim lefrei chevus avim. However, vim omruli, if the Yisayim clearly told the Balchev that elu b'meya dmei asoda shetarafta, in other words, you want to take this soda from us, and we're giving you 100 instead of this field. So basically, we're like buying this field from you for this 100. Is then any yochalazav litrefesa pamachaz b'shar chevi. In other words, if they gave the metaltalum without specifying clearly that they're kilo taking this metaltalum, they're giving this metaltalum to pay the karka which he wants to be teirif. So then taka, he can go again and be teirif other karka, because lepel it's kilo like he bought the karka. Masha'inkin, if they didn't specify that they're paying it bimkoim this karka, And since there's a din of, that it's a mitzvah ala yisemim lefreya cheves avim, to pray the cheves avim with metaltalin, so therefore that he could go ahead and mon mekarkas. In other words, by lekuches, you don't have to specify. It's obvious. Obviously, they're coming to mon metal karka. The lekuches have no obligation towards the malva. So when the lekuches give the malva the money, obviously it's the money became a karka. Masha'inkin, in a case where we're going to Yisem, since there's a mitzvah la Yisem lefrei cheves avim, so therefore they have to specify that this metalton has became karka.